Salvete, discipline. We're going to do another logic lesson today. Today we're going to review kind of like a rip-roaring review through everything that we've done in a very general way, through what is logic to what are our three mental acts and their verbal expressions, and what we've learned about each of those so far. You remember we started off talking about all three of them, and then we've been going through one at a time in more detail. And we've gone through the first two so far through the square of opposition. All right, let's get started. So first off, what logic is? One of the first things we talked about. So in our textbook, we had two definitions of it. If you remember, the first one was the science of right thinking. So we have to say, what is a science? And we gave different examples of sciences. We had the hard sciences, the natural sciences, physics, biology, chemistry, that kind of stuff. Also psychology, we said, uh, those sorts of things. So what we came up with what science was is that it was an understanding that we have of things that are not our own making. There was a difference between science and art. So science was our understanding of things that we have not made. So logic then, if it's the science of right thinking, then it's our understanding of what thinking is naturally. What is the mind and how it thinks, and what does it do when it thinks, and that kind of thing. So first off, logic was a science. Our next definition was that logic was the art which enables us to proceed with order, ease, correctness in the act of reason itself. So we had to figure out, well, what was art? Art was like drawing, painting. We considered those arts. Also carpentry as an art, masonry an art, martial arts are arts. We said all of those kinds of things, I remember. So what did all those have in common was that it was a skill or knowledge that we need to be able to make something. Either like make like an actual piece of art, or to make with martial arts the certain forms that you would do and that kind of thing. So science was knowledge of things that we are not ourselves making, and art was the skill we needed to make those things. So logic was a science of thinking. It was also the art that we use to think better. So that means that logic is the knowledge that we need to make something, which is going to help us to think better. What that is that we're making is an argument. So we're making an argument so we can think clearly, and we call that argument the syllogism. All right, we'll talk about syllogism a little bit later on. Now we're going to go into the mental acts. I found this video, it's a cool video on the internet about the three mental acts. So we're going to watch that for a second.
This may sound like a mysterious thing, but if you have ever been absorbed in reading a novel, you know how the reader becomes the book. So too, as Aristotle says, the mind.
All right, so he gave us a quick overview of our 3 mental acts. He did not talk about the verbal expressions. So like he said, our 3 were first apprehension, then judgment, and then reasoning, or deductive inference, we called it. So like he said, what were the mental acts? They were any activity that we're doing with our mind. And then we express those with our verbal expressions. So that's just the words that we use to explain the mental activity that's going on when we're thinking about things. So each mental act has its own verbal expression. So we go into our first mental act, was simple apprehension. So that's when we first form in our mind a concept of what something is. Simple apprehension is the concept that we have of something. Like he said in the video, it's not yet a judgment about anything. So we're not saying, this thing is a dog, this thing is a cat. All that's happening is we're understanding what a dog is, what is the nature of a dog, and what is the nature of a cat or a man or any other thing, any other concept that we have. We express that with a word, and we call that word the term. So what is the term for my concept of a dog that I would use? It is dog. Dog is the word. I can't even talk to you about the concept without using the term, because that's how we express concepts. So if we look at this argument here, all triangles have 3 angles. All equilateral triangles are triangles. Therefore, all equilateral triangles have 3 angles. So if we're talking about our first mental act, we have to look at what are the simple apprehensions that we're having. What are the concepts we're talking about? And what are the words we're using to explain them? So if we take our first proposition, all triangles have 3 angles. What are our terms? We have 1. Triangles, we have another 3 angles. So those are concepts that we have. We have all equilateral triangles are triangles. Equilateral triangles is one concept. Triangles is another concept. All right, and then we have 2 that we already had. So our terms are the words that we have here: triangles, 3 angles, equilateral triangles. Our concepts are the understanding that we have of what those words mean. Right, that's our first mental act and our first verbal expression. Now, when we talked about concepts and simple apprehensions, we talked about the notes that these concepts have and how we can organize them. So notes are the simple concepts which are used to describe a complex concept. So our example was, if we are talking about a man, what is a man? He's described according to simpler concepts that we put together. So the logical definition of a man that we had was rational, sentient, living material substance. So that's the rational animal, right? And we use this over here on the side, the Porphyrian tree. We'll go through a little bit how to use that some more, but we use that to find the notes. The comprehension we talked about, comprehension of a concept is just the sum of all the notes of that thing. And the extension was the sum of all of the actual examples of that thing that are out there. So for our comprehension, we figure out our comprehension. What does the concept comprehend? By using our Porphyrian tree. And we find out its extension just by applying it to everything that we use the word for. So let's go over, let's try to use our Porphyrian tree to come up with the notes of man. Just quickly, so we should pretty much remember how to use this, but if we're going to do man, So we have our tree already laid out for us, and we say, okay, is man a substance? What does substance mean? Substance is anything that is instead of is not. So is man something that is? Yep. There you go. Substance. Is he corporeal? That means, is he made of matter, made of stuff? Yeah, so that makes him body, right? So we go down. If we continue on, then we can go on down. Is he animate? That means, is he alive? Yeah, men live. So we're down on the next one. Then we say, is he sensitive? That means, does he have senses? So can man see or hear or touch things? Yes, they can. Sensitive. The sensitive living thing, it's called an animal. This man's an animal. And is he rational? Can he do science? Yes. Yes, he can. He uniquely can do that. And then that's how we get to man. So then what are our notes right here? Corporeal, animate, sensitive, rational, substance. Those are our notes. So let's try it again from yeah, let's actually go back and try it again with dog this time. So we'll do it on the actual diagram. Dog. All right, so is it a substance? Is it something that is? Yes. Is it corporeal, made out of stuff? Yes. Corpus means body. So there we go. Is it animate? Is it alive? Yes, it is. So we can keep on going down. Does it have senses? Can dogs sense? Yes, they can. Keep on going down. And can it do science? It cannot. So we go over the other way to irrational. And when we get here, that's where we stop. And a little point that we talked about was that these ones here on the left, these are just to say it does not have the next thing. So these ones don't count as the notes. The notes are here. And substance as well counts. So what were our notes for dog? We had sensible, animate, corporeal, substance. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, so that's how we used our Porphyrian tree to get our notes. So that was notes, comprehension, and extension. All right, that's most of what we have to remember for our first mental act, simple apprehension. So let's move on to our second. Second was judgment, or the predication of one concept of another in affirmation or denial. So judgment is when we actually take two concepts that we have, like cat and dog, and then we predicate one of them of the other, either affirmatively or negatively. And we'll talk about that in a second, but an example would be if we think that dogs are not cats, that they're not the same, right? That would be denying one concept of another. We made a judgment. And our verbal expression was the proposition or statement. So we go back to our argument. What are our judgments and what are our propositions? So this is the written out version of the argument, so we know we're going to have the verbal expression, not the actual mental experience here, so we just have the propositions. Proposition is going to be whenever we express that one concept is or is not another concept. So everywhere we have two concepts and we predicate one of the other, that's where we're going to have proposition. All triangles have three angles. We have two concepts there, triangles, three angles. And we're saying that one does indeed have the other. So we have affirmative predication and two concepts. So we have one proposition right there. Equilateral triangles are triangles. It's the same thing. We have two concepts and an affirmation. And all equilateral triangles have three angles. That's another affirmation there. So we have our three propositions in our argument, and our judgments are our actual thoughts that we use to make these propositions. So when I think, how many angles does a triangle have? It has three angles. When I think that, that's my judgment that I make. When I write it out in a sentence, then that is a proposition. All right, and then we did a lot with these propositions. We just reviewed them in the last lesson, so we're not going to go over it too much. But let's just look at our square of opposition for a second. The major things that we learned about propositions was their properties of quality, and quantity. Our quality and our quantity. And should we remember what that means? The quality is whether the proposition is predicating affirmatively or negatively. So we can divide it. And one side is the affirmative side. We use this Latin word for it to remember these letters. And we have the negative side. And then our quantity has to do with how much. So are we predicating all of the predicate of the subject or only some of it? So we have our universal, that's if we're talking about all of them, and our particular, that's if we're talking about only some. So that's where we get our four different logical propositions. These are all categorical propositions are going to be one of these four. So if we're predicating affirmatively, it means we're saying that something is something. Doing it universally, that means we're saying that all of something is something. So all S subject is P, whatever the predicate is. And then we can use this universal formula for any number of different S's and P's. So it could be all dogs are brown, or all cats are black, whatever. Then we had the negative one, universal one, that's a proposition that says something is not something, and that actually all of them are not. So that would be no subject is the predicate. So no dogs are cats. And our particulars, those are just to say that only some are or only some are not. So if we said some dogs are brown. That would be here. Some S is P. And then this would be our negative version. So some S is not P. Or a particular example, some dogs are not cats. All right, and then we remember, we just reviewed it, we use these to make our square of opposition, and we have all these relationships, and all of these relationships will help us in actual argument and actual reasoning. And our third mental act so our third mental act, we still haven't gone over in detail, so we still only generally know what it is. So the third mental act was deductive inference, or in the video we watched, it was called reasoning. I could call it deduction. The deductive inference occurs when we make the logical connections in our mind between the terms in the argument in a way that shows us the conclusion either follows or does not follow from the premises. And the verbal expression was the syllogism that we talked about. So deductive inference is when we make logical connections between the different concepts that we're thinking about and the different propositions, and then from some other things that we know for sure something else has to be true or false. So if I'm thinking and I say, I'm trying to understand, and I say that I know I will get a good grade because I did well on my schoolwork, that would be a deduction. We're going from one thing we know that I'm going to get a good, or we're going from one thing that we know that we did well on our schoolwork to another thing that I'm going to get a good grade. How did we know that? Because we know anyone who does well on their schoolwork is going to get a good grade, and I did. So we're taking those two things that we know, and then we're realizing that implies that something else is also true. Same thing over here. If I think I'm a human being because I can speak, and anything which speaks rationally is a human being, and that I can speak, so therefore I'm also a human being. And we're actually not at school anymore, are we? So we're not even going to talk about this one. All right, so the third mental act, we're going to talk about it very soon. This is really where the whole meat of logic is where we're getting into these syllogisms, these arguments, what are the different kinds of syllogisms, what we can do with them. This is our goal. This is where we want to get. We're almost there. All right, and this was our little diagram. Just quickly remember, these are our three. This is where we're heading to, and these are their verbal expressions.